Welcome back, everyone, to the 16th episode of Blue Collar, White Collar, with me, Kieran, and my co-host, Nicholas. How are you doing, Nicholas?
Oh, you did that on purpose, didn't you?
I got called out last time, so
I am very well, Kieran. How are you?
I am doing great. It's been a good few days for me. My wife's birthday is soon. My in-laws are coming to visit for it. Everything's nice. How about you, Nicholas? Did I already ask that?
Thanks. Yeah, well, it's funny. We don't usually do a little personal thing, but yeah, I'm good.
Wonderful. So I'll let Nick take the reins at the beginning of this because this is a subject that is going to be closer to his heart than mine. So take it away, Nick. What are we talking about today?
Well, it's not what we're talking about, Kieran. It's what we're singing about. The name is Mamdani. Mamdani. The name is Mamdani. Mamdani. Did you hear that? That was like a big meme.
Really? Because I found that really cringy.
Yeah. Well, it's intentionally cringy.
Okay, good. Good. Then it was
But
successful.
it was all over the internet during the campaign. We're talking about Zohran Mamdani,
Yeah.
the newly elected mayor of New York City, who got elected in early November of 2 weeks ago. And we're going to talk about the significance of that win. We're going to talk about his politics and kind of what it means for the States, but even more broadly, how it connects to Canada and just a form of politics that maybe is coming into its own way that it hasn't really before.
Yeah.
So, Kieran,
Well, yeah, what it means for the left.
who is Zohran Mamdani?
Zohran is a young millennial, I believe. Is he? He's older than we are, but not by much.
34.
34. So he's younger than my brother. Of Indian descent, born in Uganda, and he is on city council currently. Is that what it is, or state council?
He was he was an assemblyman. He was a city councilor in New York City. He came to New York when he was 7 years old, if I'm not mistaken, and became an assemblyman at the age of 28, I think, because I think it was a 6-year term, maybe 4. And then he recently ran for the Democratic nomination for mayor of New York City. And typically, or at least in recent times, Democrats automatically win. The real contest is who wins the Democratic primary.
Mm-hmm.
He was up against the Titan, who is Andrew Cuomo. Andrew Cuomo's Cuomo name is just very well known in New York City. Former governor of the state of New York, disgraced, and then tried to make his political comeback and become mayor of New York City.
Which his father was, I believe.
Sorry?
I believe Andrew Cuomo's father was mayor of New York.
Oh, was he? Okay.
I think so.
Okay.
Mario Cuomo, I think was his name.
Maybe, but he definitely does come from a kind of legacy family.
Yeah, the dynasty.
Yeah, exactly. So Andrew Cuomo and Zohran Mamdani, who at first started as a nobody, like no one had heard of this guy
0% in the polls.
a year ago, and he steadily climbed in the polls. He's a kind of very inspiring, charismatic young candidate, and it kind of becomes a two-person race at one point, and Zohran ends up winning by a decent margin, if I'm not mistaken. It wasn't crazy close.
Even if the Republican dropped out, he still would have won. That's how significant it was.
But I'm talking about the Democratic primary, because there were basically we repeated the race twice. There was the Democratic primary where it was Mamdani versus Cuomo. And then when Mamdani won, Andrew Cuomo said, "I'm still running, but as an independent." And then it became Mamdani versus Cuomo 2.0. And Mamdani won again by similar margins. Um, and now he is the mayor-elect of New York City, which is very exciting,
Hmm.
at least for some. Some people hate this guy.
Look,
Um,
I want to say a few things because like him and I clearly have very different politics. You know, being a democratic socialist, I'm very much against most of those things. But one of the things I will congratulate him on that he ran a beautiful campaign by appealing to working class people and actually understanding the things that really affected people's lives. Not, the fact that they tried to make the Democratic nomination a question about Israel was just ridiculously stupid, and he knew how to respond to that. And it's about New York. It's the New York mayor. We're not running for anything to do with even international affairs, let alone specifically Israel. And he's like, I'm going to stick to dealing with the problems of New Yorkers. And that's what someone really needs to do if they're going to be a representative of a region. Focus on that region. And that's one of the things that Cuomo was just a complete idiot on. And he even kind of did a reversal, not a full reversal in his position, but on the tactic of making it about Israel. He realized that was costly for him because people are like, why are you bringing this shit up? This is not has nothing to do with New York. So he played a real good game. Mamdani played a real good. He had a great campaign. As I said, he came up from 0, maybe 1% in the polls, in the early polls, to a resounding victory. And it's all down to populism, left or right. It didn't matter. Populism, which seems to be the way that politics are headed in many areas across the West, whether that's for good or for ill.
it's interesting when you are trying to define Mamdani's politics. Um, and you say populism. I don't know that's the first word I would use. So, for context, for those who maybe don't know, Mamdani got elected exactly 1 year after Trump did, right? And Mamdani, who was at the time preparing his run for New York City when Trump won at the end of 2024, he went out onto the street. He had a friend bring a big camera, and he had a mic, and he basically went into like journalist mode. And he would ask people on the street, "Who'd you vote for?" And when he would find a Trump voter, and it was very easy, right? There were a lot of New Yorkers who did vote for Trump. And he would ask them, "Why'd you vote for Trump?" And the answer that he heard overwhelmingly was not, "Oh, I hate immigrants and Trump hates immigrants and I want to get immigrants out. I, believe in, all the crazy stuff that Trump believes." No, their answer was always the same, or almost always the same. Trump promised to make my life more affordable. I believe that Trump was better positioned to make my life more affordable than Kamala Harris was. And so I voted for him. At the kind of, despite all of the, very anti-immigrant, racist, sexist, just, crazy stuff that Trump brings, he was still seen as a better candidate economically than Kamala Harris was. And so they said, my first priority is my pocketbook, right? My expenses. My expenses are too high, and that is the lens through which I'm voting. And Trump is my choice.
I do want to say that in many ways, I think one of the things that they probably would have, although not usually, but would have agreed with him on, is actually the immigration sentiment that Trump does push, because at the time they had such an influx of people into New York who weren't citizens, who came in illegally or through the Biden asylum policy, that it really did inflame a certain sentiment in New York that is not a typical sentiment you see in New York. So while they're not immigrant hating people, they were upset at this fact and would have had a more anti-immigrant sentiment than New York normally does have.
Right, but only through the lens of affordability, right?
In the end,
and
yes.
I think that's the point, right? That's the point, is that it all came back to affordability. And, we know, and, we've all been collectively reflecting on what happened in 2024 and how Trump was able to win again. And fundamentally, it is because I think a lot of working class people felt left behind by the Democrats. That it was the party of the educated, the wealthy, the elite. It's not the party of the working man. And so Zohran Mamdani basically said, okay, I'm going to change that. I'm going to run for the working man, as you said. And he ran on four things. Four policies that he repeated over and over and over and over again. Obviously, he had positions on other issues beyond those four. But when he was talking about his campaign, when he was campaigning, he repeated four policies over and over and over again. I wonder if you can name the four policies, Kieran.
Not off the top of my head. I know there's buses, the free buses.
Fast and free buses is one.
I believe was one of them had to do with rent control.
Freeze the rent.
And off the top of my head, I can't recall the other two.
The other two were
the grocery stores.
Public option for groceries, right? We're going to offer public grocery stores to try to control prices. And the fourth one was free childcare. Oh.
I guess tax the rich encompasses all of them.
That's right. There's the how we're going to pay for all this, which is mainly focused on taxing the rich. But those were the policies because he basically said, look, what are people's biggest expenses? It's housing, it's transportation, it's food, and it's childcare. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to campaign on solutions to each of those four things. And he did that. And he did that so successfully, where he said, I am going to find ways to make your life more affordable, to make your life more like livable, right? Because so many people are scraping by or not, right? Or not scraping by. And Mamdani said, look, this cannot be a city where only the rich can live. And I am going to fight to make this a city where everyone belongs. And that fundamentally was what carried him to victory. And I think it's a great message that Democrats need to absorb because, we've talked about it a lot. Like, I think social issues are secondary to economic issues for most people.
And as you said, the Democratic Party seems to have transformed into an elitist type party, and those elitists push those social issues to the front of the party. They made them primary because non-working class people, they don't really struggle with the financial aspects as much, so those kind of fall by the wayside. And so the everyday worker, your blue collar people, they felt left behind. And they said, why can't we focus on the things that matter to me? My life is just, things are too expensive. I can't afford to survive in the place that I was born and raised, and I want to stay here. And so Mamdani came in and said, I hear you. I'm going to do, to the best of my ability, just that. And he won. So the reason that I say this populism, and I know you kind of disagree with that, and that's not the main word that I would use to describe it, is I believe generally the left in its best form is populistic, because it should be about what the average person needs or wants to make their life better. That is what the left should be about, in my opinion.
Well, there's a big distinction between the two, right? Wants and needs.
Yes.
And Mamdani talks about it a lot when you listen to him in his interviews. He says, my goal is to ensure that everyone has what they need, right? Indulgences, things that you want, having enough money for, vacations or shopping sprees or kind of splurges is not my priority. My priority is to ensure, and this is at the heart of his politics and the heart of democratic socialism, as Bernie Sanders or AOC will tell you, right? Fundamentally, the idea of democratic socialism is based on the kind of right to dignity of the person, and that to have dignity, you must be able to access the things you need.
Yeah, healthcare wasn't one of the 5 that you mentioned earlier. Wasn't one of the 4 you mentioned earlier.
You're right. I didn't mention that. Mamdani doesn't talk about healthcare. Right. Healthcare is not really a city
it's
thing
not something
anyway.
You can do, exactly.
It's not municipal. But anyway, that was kind of at the heart of his campaign is I'm going to make sure you can get what you need. And I don't really understand all the blowback that he's received. And we can kind of talk about some of the criticisms, and maybe that's a good way to go now, because Kieran, you opened with saying you don't really agree with him, and yet you are, this podcast is called Blue Collar, White Collar, and you represent the blue collars. And would you not agree that Mamdani is a champion of the blue collar class?
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. Andrew Cuomo was more for the elite. I just think that while he is fighting for he's fighting for the right people. I think that his solutions are not ones that will necessarily help. They may help in the immediate term, but I think they will likely have downstream consequences that will cause more problems. One of the things that a lot of people have made comments about is free buses will likely lead to more homeless people getting on the buses. You'll likely end up having more crime on the buses. If you look at the subways where people just like hop the turnstile or whatever you call those things, I don't live in an area that has subways, so we don't have those things. You end up with a lot of homeless people just sleeping in them. So that's one way that, fast and free sounds nice. I would love it have fast and free buses, but it doesn't just, these things don't just happen, and there's always downstream consequences. I don't even know how to describe him. I think he may be an economist, Thomas Sowell. Wonderful, wonderful author. You should check him out, Nick. You probably wouldn't like a lot of what he says, but he's incredibly intelligent. One of the things he says is there are no solutions, only trade-offs. So while you may make buses free and therefore more accessible for people, there are trade-offs, and one of those trade-offs is there's likely going to be some negative things that come with it, like, as I said, homeless people, and maybe an increase in crime on said buses. But obviously I don't like the policies that he's implementing because I'm not a socialist.
But you agree with the what, you disagree with the how, right?
Exactly.
You agree.
Yeah, I 100%, that's right. And one of the reasons that I am going to be so positive about Mamdani is because while I disagree with his policies, they are going to have no impact on me whatsoever. And socialist policies, in my opinion, the best place for them is the local government, because it's more close to home for everyone. So, how many people voted for him in that area and how many people didn't? When you scale it up to nationally, you're affecting way more people, and you have much less. So put it this way, if New York decides to go with Mamdani and say Austin, Texas decides to go with someone else, and then Mamdani's policies say they do great, then Austin, Texas can say, you know what, we're actually going to take from what we like from Mamdani's policies and adopt them here. Whereas when you do that federally, the bad parts are going to happen, and you can't really make comparisons and take from here and there. You can't get the best aspects of all the different people. So locally is in my opinion the best place for socialist policies. Federally, I don't think, I find it dangerous. Anyway. Yeah.
Well, I think Mamdani does not have any illusions that these things are going to be easy, right? I think that they're great ideas, and they're so kind of fundamental and basic he's not the first one to have them, right? But he's the first one to run on them as a kind of the core of his platform. And we're going to see whether it works or not. Because, and this is what I find so interesting, is that we have people like Bernie Sanders, AOC, people who kind of represent the modern era of democratic socialism, because, you know, you can trace democratic socialism back to the 1920s. But Mamdani is the first democratic socialist with any executive power, right? When you're a senator or a representative in the House of Representatives, you don't have any executive power.
You're one voice.
You are one vote among many. Whereas Mamdani has executive power now, and he's going to build his staff, and they are going to run the city, right? They're in charge of all kinds of different municipal bodies, and they are going to decide how they want to run those bodies. They're going to be able to create new institutions like public grocery stores, and we're going to see, right? And some people say it'll work, and some people say it won't. And am I 100% convinced that everything that he tries is going to work? No, I have a healthy amount of skepticism. But I think what is so great, and what I think a lot of people agree on, is we're just happy that he's trying, right? At least his goals are, right, the what you and I agree on, despite having very different views. And maybe of his four promises, his four core promises, maybe two of them work, let's say, and two of them don't. Two of them are spectacular failures. I still think that is huge, right? Because as you say, if he, for example, manages to implement, let's say his public grocery stores works, and let's say his rent control has a huge impact on poverty, right? But he fails to get free childcare for all, and his fast and free buses is a spectacular fail. Let's just say, right? Well, then great. All of a sudden, other cities can start going, hey, that rent control thing worked really well. And hey, public grocery stores might not be the worst idea. And all of a sudden, let's say one state, multiple cities in a state start doing the same thing. Let's take New York as an example. Maybe they start doing it in Albany and other kind of New York cities. Then the governor goes, hey, this is pretty popular. Maybe we, as the state of New York, should start supporting these, or even spearheading it, right, and making it more coherent. And then they start getting federal funding from, let's say, the Democratic president in 2028. Here's the hoping.
You're assuming that.
I know. But that's not the conversation we're having. My point is just that, very often good ideas start small, and if they are successful, they scale. And what Mamdani is doing is so bold, and I admire it so much, and it's very exciting to see someone who is, generating excitement in, I would argue, a way that no one in the Democratic Party has since Obama. And let's see how it goes, right? Let's see.
Yeah, I agree. And one of the things, we talked about this offline, a couple weeks ago, was that you had said that he's a generational talent. And what I responded with is that he definitely has the potential to be. He's ran a great campaign. Now it's his time to see if he can deliver. And like you said, if he can even have even just one really good success, if the other three aren't dismal failures that make New York a vastly worse place, that one success is great.
Mm-hmm.
And if he can take that success and take it into a second term, that he may be a true generational talent, because that's really what's going to prove it, is if he can take the win and keep running with it. Because a lot of people, they take the win and they fizzle out, and you never hear from them in 10 years.
Yeah.
People still talk about it, but no one talks. You don't hear that much from. What's a good example? It doesn't really matter. That's the point. I can't think, because they faded into nothing. So if he's able to have successes, good.
Mamdani had a great line when he won. He said, "We cannot be remembered for having won this campaign. We have to be remembered for what we did after we won, right? And I think he's serious, right? I think he is going to put 110% of his soul into this work. I think that he is going to make mistakes. I think he is going to fail in a lot of ways. But damn, do I admire him for trying, right? Because we are in an era, right, where life is so incredibly unaffordable in the United States, very true in Canada as well. And we need new solutions, right? We can't simply go on as we have been when COVID led to inflation and all kinds of other economic disruptions. We are living in a kind of new era and we need new solutions. And I think that, he's talking about the policies. He's also talking about the people who have benefited from all these economic crises, right? We know for a fact that the richest people in the world have gotten abysmally more rich in the last 5 years, right? Mamdani wants to go after them. A lot of them live in New York City. A lot of them pay property taxes. He is obviously talking to the governor about some of the ways that she can also generate revenue to kind of help with some of his work. They don't agree on everything, but she has endorsed him. What's her name?
Kathy Hochul?
You know who I'm talking about?
Is it
Governor
Kathy?
of New York City.
Is it Kathy Hochul?
Hochul, that's it. She endorsed him, right? She came out and straight up endorsed him. So they probably don't agree on everything, but they're going to be partners. And I think that they share similar goals. They share the what. Maybe they don't necessarily share the how. But I think it'll be interesting just to kind of see. And, more broadly, what's going to be so interesting is not just what happens in New York City, but whether we see other candidates. And this is maybe a good segue to the next piece of our discussion, which is, will democratic socialism become more mainstream in the Democratic Party?
Yeah,
what do you think?
I definitely think it has the potential to. I believe, I don't know if she won, but I think in is it Portland, Oregon? I can't remember. There's out in the western United States. There's a woman running for mayor out there as well, and it was a really tight race the last time that I looked into it, and she was also a Democratic Socialist, and so it has the potential to. But with the elections that happened in early November, you also saw a lot of your standard issue Democrats that won. Now, to be fair, they all won. Democrats won across the board because of how abysmal people feel about Donald Trump and his administration currently. So it doesn't really show, what type of Democrat is going to succeed, because the corporatist Democrats also succeeded. But I think it definitely has the ability to, if you have more candidates with the gravitas that Mamdani has, the sheer charisma that he exudes, it has the potential to, because it's what everyone's been talking about with why Trump won. It's the Democratic Party lost the working class, and he's trying to bring the working class back. And Democratic Socialists, although, again, many of us working class people disagree with the ideas, do like someone who's saying they're fighting for them. And if they can find more people that are fighting for them, then we may work our way back. A lot of the things that I didn't like about the left when I started voting more right-wing were a lot of the social things. Now, some of them I agreed with on principle, but didn't think that enacting them into legislation in an authoritarian fashion were right. And if they stopped emphasizing those things and just started emphasizing different economic ideas, ones that I thought would be healthy for the country, I would be more likely to, send my vote back their way. And I think a lot of, especially young men that are blue collar or other working class types would feel the same way. So I have high hopes that the corporatist side of the Democratic Party, I hope it rots away. But I don't know if it's happening.
That's the key, right? Is that what I think people are most frustrated by in every part of the country, is the power of elites, right?
Yes.
And whether you are a Democrat, a Republican, you're frustrated by the fact that it feels like working hard does not get you where it used to get you, right?
Absolutely.
And what I think is important is that the lesson Democrats take from Mamdani's victory, and also the other victories on Tuesday, because you just referenced that there were other races that were happening.
I need to look up her name quickly. Keep talking, please.
There was New Jersey, there was Virginia. Forget the names, but these were not Democratic Socialist candidates, right? And they largely ran on Trump is bad, which I don't think is enough. Like, you need to be for something, you can't just be against something. But the point that I think I want to make is that what the Democrats need to learn is not we all need to be Democratic Socialists, because Democratic Socialism will not work everywhere in the country the way it worked in New York, right? However, I do think that a kind of anti-corporate, more populist, or at least more working class message is key to victory across the country, right? Let's look at Joe Manchin as an example, right? Who, if we're looking at the Democratic Party, is about as far from Zohran Mamdani as possible. Joe Manchin, for those of you who don't know,
her name is Katie Wilson, and she has been elected the next mayor of Seattle, is where it was.
Oh, okay. Joe Manchin was one of the two senators in West Virginia.
Yes. Very Republican state, but he was a Democrat.
A very Republican red state, and he is a Democrat, won. How did he win? Well, he ran as someone who was speaking to the working class of the people of West Virginia, who are much more, about, oil and natural gas, who are much more about, cutting taxes, things that are more traditionally associated with Republicans. But Joe Manchin was kind of able to speak the language and be a representative for that place.
Even though
and he won. And his vote, as much as people complain about Joe Manchin, and don't get me wrong, I don't like Joe Manchin. I don't agree with his politics at all. But as a Democrat, he gave the Democrats a majority in the Senate back in 2000 and it was either 18 or 20. But he was the deciding vote, right? He made it 50-50. And when you have the White House, the vice president breaks the tie. And a lot of stuff got passed because Joe Manchin was able to beat the Republican candidate in West Virginia, right? And so I think, and I will borrow from Ezra Klein here, who hosts a podcast and is a writer for the New York Times, and don't always agree with him, but I thought he made a really good argument following the Mamdani victory, which was Democrats need to be more things. Democrats need to be more things to more people. We need to represent the people where we run, where we live, and we need to be able to represent them, right? And speak their language, not the language of the people up here who are donating to you, right? Because in America, money has so much power in elections, and that's why so many people are frustrated. If Democrats can be democratic socialists in some places, if they can be more, let's say center-right leaning, while also kind of carrying with them certain democratic values of, inclusion and human rights, then all of a sudden we're going to see places where Democrats can't win right now. We're going to see them start to win in those places, right? Because right now the trend is that Democrats are losing in more places. They're losing more people in places where they were already losing. They're losing people in places they were winning. And the map, the kind of electoral college map, is becoming narrower and narrower for Democrats. And they need to learn from that. And they need to adapt. They need to change. They need to start speaking the language of working class people again. And Mamdani, I think, did that. And that is the core lesson that Democrats need to take.
Yeah, again, all this is just you're preaching to the choir, man. The only worry that I have is, you had someone previously come out and do this on a much larger scale, not the exact same policies, but like the idea of what the main idea that you're talking about. With that 17 years ago, his name was Barack Hussein Obama, and unfortunately, he was a wolf in sheep's clothing, and was just as big on the wars as the people he ran against, and just as much of a corporatist, although maybe slightly less than Hillary Clinton was, and he ended up not being the change that he promised. It ended up being a little bit of change, but not really as much as was promised.
We're obviously not talking about Barack Obama in this, but like the Affordable Care Act, come on, that was huge. Sure. Obamacare is absolutely huge, and you cannot forget that.
Yeah, and look, I'm not going to say it's worse than the alternative, but Obamacare sucks. Listen to the people on it; it's terrible, but they would still take it over what the alternative is. Anyway, let's get back to
Obamacare granted healthcare,
sure,
access to healthcare, 20 million people.
Again, I'm not arguing that. I'm just saying if you talk to the people who are on it, they think that it's not good, but it's also better. They would say it's better than the alternative. So yes, I will agree with you on.
Yeah, some people would say that.
Sure. One of the things that I would like to talk about, because you brought it up earlier, is the pushback that Mamdani is getting. And a lot of it I do think is ideological, but in many ways I think it's not just ideological. Like, some of the people are not even like closely related to New York. Some people live in the other side of the goddamn country, and they're freaking out over it. And people who are never going to be impacted by his policies. And a few different things that come to mind for it. One, I think the fact that he's a Muslim is a big deal. A lot of people are freaking out over that fact. And, New York is a place that had the worst terror attack in the United States history.
Right.
That was done by, many Muslim men, some who actually came in from Canada. And so people are worried that he's going to implement Sharia law, which makes absolutely no sense coming from a man who supports pride parades. Sharia law and gay pride don't mix. But they see that, and especially with all the things that are going on in Israel, they see him an opponent of Israel. That's another one. Someone who's pushing back against their policies, actively calling out what's happening as a genocide. Although things are kind of on pause there right now. Who knows how that's going to go. Go ahead.
It's so telling that a candidate who is running on affordability in New York City is getting attacked, not for his ideas, not for his policies, but for his race and for his stance on Israel, right? And that's where we're at, right? Is if you can't beat them on the policies, go after the identity politics, right? Make it about Israel. And that's all Andrew Cuomo tried to do, right? Andrew Cuomo did not have ideas in the way Mamdani did, right? His ideas were not compelling. And so instead of trying to lift himself up, he tried to tear Mamdani down, right? And you saw this especially in the end of the campaign, the last 2 or 3 weeks. His attacks were ruthless. And, there were instances where he was sending out, his attack ads had extended Mamdani's beard, right? To make it look longer, to make him look more of a, like a jihadist, right? Like an extremist. That was what they were trying to do. What is that?
It's a copy of the Quran.
You have the Quran?
Yeah, of course I do.
Of course. I don't have the Quran. Why do you have the Quran?
Look at this beard. No, I'm kidding. I got it when I went to Egypt with my father. It was given to me by a lovely man. Anyway, I think it's... How do I want to put this? Back in 2024, we talked about how it was... A lot of people blamed the left for bringing in identity politics into the Democratic Party, when really, if you look about it, it was Hillary Clinton and the centrist who couldn't argue against Bernie Sanders, and so they did things like label him a sexist. And
That's right.
again, they've done the exact same thing where it was Andrew Cuomo, not Mamdani. Mamdani focusing on economic issues. Andrew Cuomo focusing on identity politics. So I want to know what you think about typically the left. I've heard this so many times, is that the left always says that the party of racists is the Republicans and the right wing in general. You hear that in Canada. They don't say Republicans because we don't have those. But what do you think about the fact that all these racist attacks, tons of them coming from the right, not going to disagree with you, not going to argue, but so many of them were coming from the left itself, from within the Democratic Party. What do you think about that?
Well, what is so interesting, and maybe we've talked about this on the show before, is that Israel and what has happened in the last 2 years has divided Democrats in a way no other issue has. The thing that, and I'm talking specifically about the Democratic Party in the United States, but if there's one issue where it's really like 50-50 and the divide is very stark, it is Israel, right? Where do we stand on Israel? And I think there are those on the kind of the side of Israel who I would argue are usually more like moderates. And they attack people on the left, on the kind of the real left, or the, progressives, democratic socialists, populists, whatever you want to call them. And they attack those people and they say they're anti-Semitic, they hate Jews, they want the death of Israel, they want, the extremists in the Middle East to take over from the river to the sea, all that stuff. Meanwhile, the people who are, marching, chanting Free Palestine, calling it a genocide, they say to the people in the middle, or at least the people on the right within the Democratic Party, and they say you are supporting a genocidal regime in Israel, and it just creates so much conflict where it's the best example of a wedge issue, right? And if you're on one side of it, you can galvanize the people who are also on your side by talking about it over and over and over again, and that's what we saw Andrew Cuomo do, right? We also saw, I should note, Mamdani making a very deliberate effort to connect with the Jewish community in New York City. You could see him; he went to all the holidays. He was posting about it, wishing the Jewish community happy Passover and everything, right? Because he wanted to show, no, I am critical of the state of Israel. I am critical of what's happening in Gaza, the genocide that the state of Israel, led by Benjamin Netanyahu, is conducting. That does not make me anti-Semitic. I do not hate Jews. In fact, I love all people who live in this city, who want to live peacefully in this city. And he really worked hard to be able to answer those attacks when Cuomo would launch them. So I don't know if that answers your question, but when we're talking about kind of racism or kind of divides on the left when it comes to race and nationality, that is where you find the Great Divide.
So I actually want to disagree with what you said very early on in this. Much of what you said is very accurate, but early on you said it's a wedge issue that divides the Democratic Party. More than 70% of the Democratic Party believe what is happening in the Middle East, in Gaza, is a genocide. More than 70%. That's greater than a supermajority. It's almost 3/4 of people. The 50-50 is actually happening in the Republican side. But the divide in that way, it actually comes more across age lines. So you see young men like me who identify more on the right. That's weird. that are opposed to the actions and will say that it's a genocide, and it's older, your boomer Republicans who will defend Israel to the death. On the Democratic side, it's more like 80 to 20 the other way when it comes to the people with power, your elected officials, your senators, your congressmen, your state senators, Andrew Cuomo types. They are like 80%, maybe even 90% pro-Israel, and 10 to 20% anti-Israel. And that's one of the things that sold so many people on Mamdani was that 70%. We'll say it's probably even higher in New York, because New York has some fairly liberal, fairly progressive place. So I'll say 75 just for the sake of it. When they made it all about Israel, 75% of New York was likely of Democratic voters. So this is the primary mainly. We're looking at it and going, what the hell are you talking about? And so, yeah, it's actually not as 50-50 as you said. It's especially on the left. Like, the left wholeheartedly agrees almost completely that what's happening over there is absurd. And so clearly Mamdani knew this and was like, no, it's about New York. And it'll always be about New York. And it's not about...
Yeah, well, I don't totally agree with the premise there. Like, how is it possible that so many Democratic voters agree that what's happening in Gaza is a genocide, and yet such a high percentage of Democratic elected officials support Israel?
So,
does that make sense?
I'll say three things. When elections happen, so senators every 6 years. So, 2 years ago is when this started. Is it 2 years or is it 3 now? No, it's 2 now.
2.
Almost 2. So how many of those? So many senators were elected prior to this. So I think 2026, you might see some hits in the primaries from people who, some of them are able to skate by on the right here is worse. And so while they make it through the primary, they just say, look how terrible the right is, and they get elected that way. And thirdly, sometimes people just run bad candidates. And so I think you're going to see in the next few years, if Democratic elite don't start saying the right things, I think a lot of them are going to start dropping like flies. There's a reason that someone like Chuck Schumer, it's not just his inability to lead his party that's likely going to tank him. I think his stance on Israel is also one of the things that's going to kneecap him when he's inevitably primaried, whenever his... I hope he's up in 2026. That would be great.
It's next year. Yeah, it is.
So, yeah, I think he's going to be done. Yeah.
Yeah, well, not to make this a whole Israel conversation, because I want to get back to Mamdani and his kind of style of politics.
Last word on this.
But, Mamdani mobilized what's important to understand is that his campaign was driven by young people, right? People of all demographics and ages came out to vote for him, but his volunteers, the tens of thousands of people who were knocking on doors for Mamdani in New York City, were primarily young people, right? And you even heard stories about young people who were feeling super isolated, who were having a hard time meeting friends and partners, and all that kind of went away, or was at least mitigated during the Mamdani campaign, right? Where they met all kinds of other like-minded people and felt like they had purpose. And it's so exciting when you have that kind of movement in a place where people connect to each other and it becomes a community, right? And Mamdani built a community, and I think that's such a beautiful way to campaign. And, I think everyone should strive to campaign like that. But young people, we also know, are overwhelmingly in agreement that the state of Israel has conducted a genocide in Gaza. And I think that's because young people did not grow up with Israel as the good guy, right? Because Israel, for most of its history, and, again, we don't need to debate this for the rest of the episode, but Israel was not always the Israel that we know now, right? Israel was the little guy, surrounded on all sides by enemies, but scrappy and able to hold on to that tiny piece of land that the UN, that the UN had officially recognized as the state of Israel. They were not conducting mass murder in the way that they have recently, right? They were previously just trying to survive and have a homeland for Jews to live in safety. And I think if you are someone who is older, who kind of grew up knowing that Israel, then you're more likely to defend them now, even though the Israel of today is, killing innocents by the thousands. Yeah. So anyway, I think that, Mamdani was able to rally those people, young people especially. And he also said repeatedly in the campaign, he said, we may disagree on Israel. We may disagree. But if we agree on everything else, I hope you will still think about voting for me. I hope that we can find commonality in the fact that we are New Yorkers and that we want a more affordable city. That was his message, and I think it's powerful.
That's one of the dumbest things, not what he said, but that's one of the dumbest things I've ever heard. Like, your opinion on a completely different country may impact whether or not you vote for me, even though we agree completely on policy. It's like, that's so stupid. Fuck's sakes, people are so dumb.
Yeah, well, it's a question of values, but I largely agree with you. Can we talk a bit about the implications of Mamdani for Canada?
I was actually just going to switch to the international. Yes, so we're clearly on the same page on that. I would love to hear. What do you think, Nicholas?
Oh,
because okay, the reason I'm asking you is because you are the type of person who, if you were in New York City, you would have been on the streets for Zohran.
No doubt.
You would have been going door to door. You'd have been volunteering. You may even be working for him in some capacity in the future. If he would be if he would be the mayor of Montreal, you would have been lockstep with him.
I like to think so. Mamdani got so many job applications after he won. His office was flooded with all his volunteers who wanted to work for him. But yeah, let's talk about what the implications are. I think let's kind of evaluate the political landscape in Canada right now. We have Mark Carney, Liberal government, 170 seats because that guy flipped last week.
2.
And
isn't it 2? Or maybe one was considering it. I know one did. I thought it was 2.
I thought it was 1.
Maybe one was just considering it, but I thought 2 had crossed the aisle. Anyway, continue.
So yeah, the Liberals are governing with a near majority, but they have shifted to the right, or at least the center, depending on who you ask. Carney is not Justin Trudeau. Carney is much more, governing in the style of a conservative.
I wouldn't go that far. Continue. I don't want to argue about this, but continue.
Yeah, okay. But we agree that Mark Carney is much further to the right than Trudeau is. We agree that the Conservatives are in a bit of a weird place right now. Pierre Poilievre is up for leadership review in January. We'll see what happens there. But the kind of, the two major parties are both over here, right? Not exactly in the same place, but there's an opening. There's no one right now leading the left in Canada. Yeah. Right? We don't have a true leftist leader in Canada. Jagmeet Singh obviously resigned after his brutal beating in the election earlier this year. The NDP are down to 7 seats. They lost official party status, and they are now in the midst of a leadership race. Kieran, have you been following this leadership race at all?
No, I haven't. I don't have time for such things. Which is that's how it goes.
That's okay.
I'd love to hear about it, and so would our 3 viewers.
Let me tell you about it.
We're down from 4.
There are 5 candidates, 3 who are, serious candidates. And one of them is named Avi Lewis. And I don't know if you remember, but Avi Lewis used to be my boss. And he is someone who is very much, aligned with the style of Mamdani politics. He is a democratic socialist and has been for a long time. It's not as though he's just kind of adopting this new approach because of Mamdani. He ran in 2025 to be an MP, lost. He ran in 2021 to be an MP, lost, although both in places where the NDP had never won. He is, a great thinker. He was a journalist. He led this thing called the LEAP Manifesto, which had a huge influence on the NDP back in 2014 as they were kind of preparing for the 2015 election. He's married to Naomi Klein, who you may know. She's a very well-known leftist author who's published many books on, climate and critiques of capitalism. And so he comes to this very naturally. And he is saying, I am the Mamdani of Canada. He won't actually say that verbatim, but that is what his campaign is about. His campaign is about affordability. His campaign is about taking on the wealthy and the powerful. His campaign is about the working class, the everyday man and woman. And, all he has to do is win this race, which is very winnable because his 2 kind of real opponents are both more traditional, Jagmeet Singh-esque NDPers, and Avi is different. And so I think that if you have only NDP members voting in the NDP leadership race, you are not competing against liberals and conservatives, right? So I think there's a very real possibility that Avi wins next year. Next March is when they will have the convention and announce the new leader. And if he becomes leader of the party, he's going to start getting real attention. And I think that when he has a platform that the whole country is listening to, they might be very interested by what he has to say and the policies that he's proposing. And I think in an era where a lot of people kind of feel like, what happened? We have 2 parties on the right. We don't have a real leftist option. I am a progressive. I believe in XYZ. I don't like that Carney's focus is on, major projects, when in fact what he should be doing is focusing on working class people, right? And I just think that Mark Carney is trying to grow the economy, but who will that benefit? It's not clear to me that it's working class everyday people.
So I do want to touch on that.
So let's see
before I get to everything else that you said. I do want to touch on the major projects is going to help the working class people, especially blue collar folks like myself. These major projects need to be constructed, and who are the people that do that? It's us blue collar people. So while in the end it is going to make the wealthy wealthier, it will also provide more jobs and more money into the pockets of people like me. Maybe not your more, I don't want to call them blue collar. I think we need a new term, because blue collar to me usually implies dirty work, like construction workers, but your working class that are more, like retail, that kind of thing. Those people aren't going to get those benefits the same way that blue collar, like myself, your dirty jobs, micro plug right there, are going to benefit from. But on to Avi Lewis. I think he definitely has a much better chance than he would have in previous years. The Liberals moving to the right, they're not on the right, but moving to the right, will bring some NDP-ish voters, the most right-wing NDP voters, into the some of them will be there, And the NDP, I think, will be left with the most left-wing, not the most, but more left-wing versions of themselves. And so he will have a greater chance, I think, than normal. I think it would definitely have benefited him if he had won either of those two races that you mentioned, which I'm going to lay at your feet, Nick. You volunteered for him. Come on, man. You could have done better.
I know. My fault.
Personal responsibility.
Yeah.
So, while I'm likely not going to vote for him if he is the leader, I do think that he has a better chance than normal. I really don't have a great view on how this big city, left-wing, democratic, socialist, populist stuff is going in Canada, because I live in an area, I think there's like 500 people in my town. So it's... I don't get, you're in the middle of Montreal. Montreal would be a place that a Mamdani-esque person would rise up. Almost like this is a lot longer ago, but like a Naheed Nenshi out of Calgary. He's not the mayor of Calgary anymore, but he was an NDP mayor back, I think it was in the 90s, maybe it was the early 2000s. And so, if some of those start popping up, I think that's the place where they'll get the most power. I don't think they'll have the federal influence that you're hoping for. If Carney is able to stop an election from happening next year and sort of hold the country together, I think the NDP is not going to be in a great place. They will likely gain some seats, but part of that is also due to the Conservatives also kind of the bottom falling out of them, even though they seemed like they had so much steam going into 2025. Like they were going to win in 2024. It's like, yeah, they're inevitable. And then Carney came in and stopped them like it was nothing. And now Poilievre is like, people are doubting his leadership capabilities, and that might even be true. He might just be better as like your standard attack dog, like he was for Stephen Harper. So they might need a more charismatic character that speaks to the working class without off-putting too many people, the way that Poilievre did. I also think he never should have taken off his glasses. I thought that made him less appealing to your average person. It's one of those weird things that just a small thing can change a person. I liked him less when he took off his glasses. And I don't really know what Avi's character is like. You clearly like him and liked his style of leadership, but I don't know if he's nearly as charismatic as Mamdani is, and it may also just be a time and place thing for Mamdani. So I have hopes for the left. I hope they're not socialists, even the Democratic version. I would prefer if the left were social democrats, and I realize that sounds very like semantics driven, but I think there's a difference. The difference being democratic socialism. Socialism being a bad thing, just making it democratic doesn't make it better. Where you have social policies in a democratic party, I think that is a good thing. So I would prefer to see that rather than democratic socialism rise in the NDP. I would prefer a stronger NDP in general, because I think maintaining the balance in the country requires more than just the two parties that are up there, your Conservatives and Liberals. I think we need to have a strong third party. I'd prefer if we had a strong fourth party, but that's not going to happen because Elizabeth May, I don't know if she's still the leader of the Green Party, but they're basically gone. We have no fifth party because every time they kind of appear, they kind of disappear shortly after, like with the PPC rip. So I don't have the...
Yeah.
I don't think we'll likely see the type of same democratic, the same type of politicians as Mamdani. I don't see them rising up in Canada the same way. They may, but I think it'll start popping up locally in big cities before it ever happens at a federal level like you're talking about.
Yeah, maybe. And let's remember, like, it's not as though we shouldn't assume that the NDP is on their way to forming government in the next election, right? This kind of thing takes time. Um, but let's remember what the NDP is, right? Fundamentally, the NDP was founded to be the party of unions, right? The party of working class people standing up to the man, right? And we are in a moment where all of a sudden a lot of working class people want to stand up to the man,
Yeah.
right? And I don't think Carney has branded himself that way. I don't think Pierre Poilievre has, although I would say Poilievre has done a better job
Absolutely.
of kind of stealing NDP. Right, we always think about it as NDP, liberal, conservative, right? But it's not that at all, right?
That's not how it works at all.
A lot, exactly. It's ridiculous, at least in today's political climate.
To give
A lot of
to give people the idea, I voted for the NDP and jumped right over the Liberal Party when it came to how I was going to vote. I never voted Conservative, but I always voted on the right, and it was never the Liberals. So,
yeah, well, yeah, exactly. It's more often the political spectrum is more a circle, right?
it's even more complicated
But
than that.
yeah, exactly. Anyway, but the point is that the Conservatives over the last few elections have done a really good job of stealing NDP votes, right? A lot of them have gone to the Liberals, it's true. A lot of NDP voters vote strategically for the Liberals to keep the Conservatives out. But a lot of NDP voters who are working class, who are all about, affordability, vote Conservative. And I think what Avi's trying to do is get those people back, right? The NDP needs to respect its history, its identity, and it has failed to do that, right? The NDP became the kind of, woke, preachy,
Social justice warrior types.
social justice warrior party, right? And they need to become an economic party again, right? It's the same story that we saw with the Democrats, right? Which is, if the first thing that you think of when you think of a party is not their economics, especially in a time of high inflation and affordability challenges, if a party is not associated with its economic platform, it is not a party that will win, right? And we've talked about this on the show many times, but Avi is trying to bring us back to the kind of economic populism of the old NDP, right? And I think that's exciting because I think slowly but surely, if he wins, he might, he'll be on the debate stage, right, with Carney and maybe Poilievre in the next federal election, and he'll have a platform to kind of voice these ideas, and maybe they catch on, right? Impossible to predict with politics, right? Like, no one predicted that Mamdani would do anything, and then he did. I think he might have a shot, and it'll be exciting to see. And I personally feel excited because it's nice to see this kind of candidate running in my country, because you so often look at the States and you go, oh, that's so cool, like, Obama or Mamdani, and like, I want to get in there, I want to get involved. But that's not our fight, right?
So I've not really a full hypothesis, but I want to see what you think about this. I see the NDP voter bloc, at least in the past, you could break it down into three groups. You have your blue-collar, working-class union types, like myself would be. Then you had your let's say Starbucks worker, socialist, sometimes woke types. And then you had your left-leaning, semi-elite, I don't really want to say full elite, but like your, some people like my mother would have been, who, they were middle class and willing to vote liberal when strategic, but fundamentally believed in the values of the NDP. And the reason, in my opinion, that the NDP got creamed in the last election was because they lost one of those groups to the Liberals, and they lost one of those groups to the Conservatives. And they're only left with your Starbucks worker types. I don't. I'm sounding more like mean about those people than I am intending. That's just the type of person that in my head I'm imagining. Nicer. Someone like yourself would be the nicest way that I could put it. You're left wing.
I'm the Starbucks worker?
You fall under that category. Of the three, you fall under that category. It's not exactly what I meant. That's a lot meaner version than I had intended. I should have just said someone like yourself. But basically, of the three people that I could name, you have you, me, and my mother. And my mother voted in 2015 for the Liberals. And I voted right-wing. And you stayed with the NDP for the most part. Those are the three groups. And as I said, lost 2 out of 3 of them. And that's why they have been decimated currently. So they need to...
Decimated.
I think they could get us back. Many of us. Maybe not me, but many of us back. Us union blue-collar types. I don't see, for the near future, the Liberal types coming back. It might take a while.
It might, and it might not, right? I think that if we remember the story of Jack Layton, rest in peace. Jack Layton decimated the Liberal Party. The Liberal Party was down to, I think, 12 seats or something in 2011.
Under Michael Ignatieff.
That's right. There was Michael Ignatieff. There was Stéphane Dion for a little while.
I forgot about
but
Dion.
You know what the Liberals remember as the Dark Ages, right?
Yeah.
And you know that was an opportunity that the NDP had to capitalize on, right? So I do think it also has to do with the kind of health of the other parties, and you know the NDP. You know, right now is unhealthy in a moment when both the Liberals especially, but also the Conservatives are doing quite well. I think that we will need to see a shift in those power dynamics, but it's so important to remember that politics is unpredictable, that you never know what's going to happen. Things can happen slowly, things can happen quickly, but it is never a sure thing. And I think just like Mamdani, we have exciting new prospects in Canada, and I think it'll be exciting to watch and participate in this race, and we'll see what happens.
And on that note, congratulations, Mamdani. Thanks for stopping by.